Well, hello everyone. Thanks for stopping by my YouTube channel, Experimenting on the Word. Boy, are we in for a treat today. I've got 6 pages of notes. Okay, that's kind of a joke. Not about the treat part, not about all the notes, but I have been listening to this book right here. It's called Team of Rivals. I've been listening to it on Audible, and it's about Abraham Lincoln's cabinet that he had during the Civil War, the people who were on his cabinet. And there were so many similarities that just stood out to me between the arguments people used to defend slavery and the arguments you hear now to defend abortion. My mind was going, boom, I can't believe this. I've got to do a video about this. In fact, I told a friend that I was preparing this video, and she was like, oh, when is it going to be done? I want to watch it. And I was like, well, okay, I've got to buy the book so I can go back and find this part that I heard on the recording, and I got to check this and cross-reference this, and I started to do some of that, and I realized that could take me forever and this video would never get done. So it is what it is. Hey, but you could read the book if I don't reference something clearly. I got the stuff off Wikipedia and from the book mostly, and I thought I could make it perfect, but I can't make it perfect. So there are 4 points I want to talk about, and I'll go through all those 4 points separately. But just to give you a little rundown, one of them, well, 2 of the points actually concern quotes by the Secretary of State on Lincoln's cabinet, Seward, that he made, and one is a speech he gave, which is called the Higher Law Speech now. The second point is, again, about a quote Seward made about the progressive nature of slavery. The third point is about similarities I see in the language used to defend slavery and abortion. And the fourth one is, okay, a little Star Trek reference, space-time continuum. My family's going to laugh at me. Okay, so to begin with the first point, I want to tell you a little bit about William H. Seward, which I had mostly remembered him for buying Alaska, which was after Lincoln's administration. You know, we call it Seward's Folly. But anyway, he was a Secretary of State. He and his wife were both abolitionists, and in fact, their home was a stop on the Underground Railroad. So in 1850, Seward made a speech, a very controversial anti-slavery speech, where he referred to a higher law. He said, there is a higher law than the Constitution. And after he did this, he was excoriated by numerous people, especially in the South. They were so furious with him that he would say there was something higher than the Constitution. And that got me thinking, well, would people in general be upset if they read Seward's speech today? I don't think so, because slavery is almost universally recognized as wrong, right? So the question is, why? Why do we know it's wrong? I mean, most people would say they know it's wrong regardless of what the Constitution says. But the question is, why? To what principle or authority are we referring when we say slavery is wrong? So is there a higher law? Yeah, so what if someone said there was a higher law regarding abortion? I think we've seen that people who say that are really castigated by the media. Our Constitution allows for abortion, but does that make it right? So if there is some higher principle than our law that made slavery wrong years ago, what application does that principle have to abortion today? So my second point is about the aggressive nature of slavery, which I think also applies to abortion these days. I'm going to read a quote by Seward. He said, "Freedom is in harmony with our system of government and with the spirit of the age, and is therefore passive and quiescent. Slavery is in conflict with that system, with justice, and with humanity, and is therefore organized, defensive, active, and perpetually aggressive." On Wikipedia, I found a little rundown of the progressive nature of slavery in the U.S., so I'm going to go through that, and then we'll talk about the progressive nature of abortion. The transformation of the social status of Africans from independent servitude, the transformation of the social status of Africans from indentured servitude to slaves in a racial caste which they could not leave or escape happened gradually. So it used to be that they were just indentured servants who could eventually be free. But in 1654, a black indentured servant in colonial Virginia was the first man to be declared a slave in a civil case. And then there was a slave, Elizabeth K. Grinstead. She was one of the first persons of African ancestry in the North America colonies to sue for freedom from slavery and win. And she lived from 1630 to 1665, so it happened somewhere in there. She won her case based on the fact that her father was an Englishman and that she was a baptized Christian. And what I thought was interesting was that when she was born, the community censured Elizabeth's father for getting Elizabeth's mother pregnant and told him that she needed to take care of and provide for Elizabeth, which it seems like he stepped to the plate and he did, but then he died and the person he trusted to care for Elizabeth didn't care for her, and she ended up being a slave. Like her indentured servitude basically never ended. So she sued for freedom from slavery and she won. But after her case, the Virginia House passed a law that the social status of children would follow that of their mother. So you can see how that just broadened the bounds of slavery so much, and a slave master would have no repercussions for abusing one of his female slaves and getting her pregnant, and he wouldn't have responsibility for the children, as we see that happen later on in the South. So by the time of the American Revolution, the status of a slave had been institutionalized. In the 19th century, proponents of slavery declared it a necessary evil, but they were still calling it evil. However, as things progressed, apologies for slavery morphed into descriptions of slavery as a beneficial scheme of labor control. And in fact, John C. Calhoun declared that slavery was, instead of an evil, a good, a positive good. And he said that in 1837. And now in 1850, Congress passed the Fugitive Slave Act, which required law enforcement and citizens to cooperate in the capture of and return of slaves who had escaped. And then the infamous Dred Scott decision in 1857, which was just so discouraging to slaves and to abolitionists. That decision held that a slave did not become free when taken into a free state. And formerly, some slaves had won their freedom by saying that they had been taken into a free state and held there some time and that they should then be free. But that was done away with the Dred Scott decision. People of African descent imported into the United States and held as slaves or their descendants could never be citizens. A state could not bar slave owners from bringing slaves into that state, and that was a consequence of the Dred Scott decision. And the South resented restrictions, what they called them, restrictions on their freedom. They wanted slavery to be legal in all states forever. They thought it was their right. If it was their right in one state, why couldn't it be their right in another state? And so they kept pushing progressive and aggressive nature of slavery, that it needed to be a right. If a right is a right, so why not someplace else, was their point. Well, abortion has also progressed. The Virginia governor, Northam, I just got to read this statement. It is so broad, it astounds me that someone would say this. But he said, "If a mother is in labor, I can tell you exactly what would happen. The infant would be delivered. The infant would be kept comfortable. The infant would be resuscitated if that's what the mother and the family desired, and then a discussion would ensue between the physicians and the mother." Northam said, alluding to the physician and mother discussing whether the born infant should live or die. So now we're not just talking about abortion, we're talking about whether to keep a child alive after it's born. And I recognize that probably many pro-abortion people say that's going too far. No, that's not what we intend. But I'm just reading this to demonstrate the progressive nature, that this wouldn't even have been thought of or discussed a while ago, whether or not this governor actually brings this to pass. My point is, this is a huge progressive and aggressive stance to take, exceeding the bounds of where abortion has been. And I know it also has been applied to, this is meant to apply to children that doctors may presume to have conditions incompatible with living, but I just have to say, I've worked with clients who were born and survived with conditions supposedly incompatible to life, but yet they were alive. And so, who are we to decide what that boundary is? And here's another case. It's called Doe versus Bolton. The U.S. Supreme Court held that medical judgment may be exercised in the light of all factors: physical, emotional, psychological, familial, and the woman's age, relevant to the well-being of the patient. All these factors may relate to health. This allows the attending physician the room he needs to make his best medical judgment. And so that is about abortion, that a physician could take all these things into account when deciding whether abortion is a right or not. And that's just so broad that it, again, progressive and aggressive stance. Okay, on to my third point, which is the similarities that I see between the language used to defend abortion and the language used to defend slavery. So, Ralph Waldo Emerson, say that 3 times fast, I cannot. Use what words you will, you cannot say but what you are. Now that might not be a direct quote, I found variations on the internet, but that's how I learned it. So, no matter what you say, it kind of reveals who you are and what you're about. So I just picked this headline off the internet. New York puts in measures to protect access to abortion, assault on women's reproductive rights. So words like assault, subjugation, restriction, rights. I mean, those words sound very familiar to me with the abortion debate, but they were also the same words or synonyms to what the South used. I'm just going to go through some that I recognized as I was listening to this book. So after Seward gave his higher law speech, the South was furious, and they said, "Don't interfere in our domestic affairs." So that's what they call slavery, is their domestic affair. And that sounds very similar to me to, it's a woman's right to choose, it's my body. And both of those, that language totally sidesteps the issue that Seward was then, and we are now talking of individuals. As slaves as individuals, as the unborn child as an individual. When we speak of my child, it's not in the same sense that a slave owner would speak of my slave, and we understand we don't own our children, any more than a slave owner owned a slave, except that seems to change when the child is unborn. Somehow it's no longer my child, but it's my body, which translates into not really a person. So we can decide your destiny, as a medical community. But just as science could have abundantly proven the personhood of a slave, back when slavery was practiced here in the U.S., there is abundant scientific evidence now that the fetus is a child, and the fetus has a separate body from the mother. So just the term "my body" it's a misnomer. It's another body. The South argued that they were being permanently subjugated with restricted territory, and that subjugation just seems to me to be very similar to some of the abortion arguments made today, that we are taking away a woman's right, we're subjugating her by restricting abortion. So the South felt they were fighting for their rights by fighting for slavery. I already said this. Southerners felt that if slavery was their right in one place, then it must be extended throughout the U.S. South also said that the North had no right to judge their practice of slavery because they weren't Southerners. And we would find that argument just ridiculous today. Of course we can say that it's wrong to own a person. Even if we're not in your situation, even if we don't live the same place as you do, we can say that, and we understand it to be true. But a lot of people say now that, well, you're a man and you should have no opinion on abortion. You're not a woman, you can't understand a woman. But that's the same argument that the South is making, that the North couldn't understand them and shouldn't be able to decide for them what was right or wrong. So again, similarities between the defensive and at the same time aggressive language that the South used to defend slavery is what I hear now in defense of abortion. Okay, on to my fourth point here. Space and time. My family will laugh at me because of this Star Trek connection. We went to the Star Trek movies. I think we probably owned the Star Trek movies when my kids were growing up. And lately, these newer movies have kind of gotten away from me. And I know there's one where, like Spock does something that erases him in the past so he doesn't exist in the future or something like that. And I always have to turn to my husband and say, now explain that thing about Spock to me again. I do not get that. And of course that's fiction, that's entertainment. But the reason we even have a storyline like that is because it's common knowledge that space and time are connected like this. So pre-Civil War we had some free states and we had some slave states. And the very idea that a person could be recognized as a person based on where they are, then being considered property when they're in a different location, that's mind-boggling to us now. Except how different is that from our day when a fetus is considered a person? From the first heartbeat heard in Ohio, that's a law they just passed in Ohio, to the law recently passed in New York allowing late-term abortion. I mean very, very, very late-term abortion. So it seems a fetus is considered a person depending on where they are in space. Another pro-abortion argument is that a woman being forced to travel out of state to terminate pregnancies because of where they live, they can't do it. Again, that's treatment of the child depending on what state they are in, and that was exactly what happened with the slaves, with the, Americans who were either slaves or not slaves, depending on what state they were in. So I found this limerick about relativity. I think it's kind of cute. There was a young lady named Bright whose speed was faster than light. She set out one day in a relative way and returned on the previous night. So I barely survived my science class where we talked about Einstein's theory of relativity. I mean, I just squeaked by. But I know, even me squeaking by, I know that space and time are inextricably connected. And I think we would consider someone to have a narrow view or to be uneducated if they dismiss the theory of relativity. Say, I don't believe that. They might even call them provincial. But isn't the view that a fetus is not a child because of where they are in time just that kind of view? They're in a stage of development. A fetus is in a stage of development that is just going to progress. And it's a matter of time. So can we honestly say we believe in light years and the theory of relativity and yet not believe in the individual personhood of someone based on where they are in time and space? Inside and outside the womb is a very small slice of time. And I think to disconnect them like that would not be reasonable. It's the same kind of reason that was confounding back when we had all these myriad rules with slaves and what states they were in and who their mother was, who their father was. It just doesn't make sense. So I've got a little quote here about provincialism by Neil A. Maxwell. Oh, gotta find where it's at. It's back here. Okay. Each spasm of selfishness narrows one's universe that much more by reducing his awareness of or concern with others. In spite of its outward worldly swagger, such indulgent individualism is actually provincial, like goldfish in a bowl, congratulating themselves on their self-sufficiency. Never mind the food pellets or changes of water. So a provincial view, a narrow view, an uneducated view. How can we have this educated view of space and time and yet not apply that same view to a fetus. I want to close with a quote by Charles Sumner. In case you don't know about Charles Sumner, he was a really fierce abolitionist and understood from a very young age that African Americans were equal to us. I mean, some abolitionists didn't quite go that far in their understanding. They knew it was wrong to own someone. They wanted slaves to be free, but they did not understand the equality of all people. And Charles Sumner did understand this, and he was beaten on the Senate floor by two Southerners, severely beaten for his views. But this is what he said. "Say, sir, in your madness, that you own the sun, the stars, the moon, but do not say that you own a man endowed with a soul that shall live immortal when sun and moon and stars have passed away."